We left off 6 lines from the bottom because of Rosh Chodesh on DAF Nun Ches Hamid Beis. Let's just get our bearings and see where we are. We have a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel regarding when you purchase real estate from a Sikri Kon, which is a Gentile violent confiscator of property. So Chazal made a takana, and they said that we give you permission to purchase land from this fellow, even though he may have confiscated it from another Jew. But because the other Jew has given up hope of ever retrieving it, it's legally a valid sale. But we do require you to pay a quarter of the value to the original owner. The assumption being is that the Sikri Kon, because he took it for free, is going to sell it at a discount, and the estimate is that he's going to sell it for a 25% discount, at least in this social structure that the Mishnah is describing. So the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel is, what does 25 or what does a quarter mean? According to Rav, when the Sikri Kon charges you 100 for the property, the value of the property is really 125. So therefore, what you have to pay to the original owner is 25, which is a fifth of the value of the property, but it's a quarter of the purchase price. Am I making myself clear? According to Shmuel, when we say a quarter, what we really mean is that the property is worth $133 and a third, and a quarter means if you divide the true value of the field into 4 parts, you pay that quarter to the original owner, which is 33 and a third. Okay, so it's a true 25%, not a 20% like Rav says, but a 25% of the value of the field, even though it's 33% or a third of the purchase price. The Gemara is now going to challenge Shmuel with the Brisa. Meisve zu Mishnah Rishona. This was the original takana. The original takana was that, forget about a quarter, that was not the original accommodation. The original accommodation was that when you buy property from a Sikri Kon, you've got to appease the original owner first by making some kind of negotiation with him. And then once he gives it his blessing, then you can buy it from the Sikri Kon. However, based in Shalachrein Amru, Halokeach min Sikri Kon, no sein laba'olam revia, Viad ba'olim al ha'elyona. But the later Basin said that no, go ahead and buy from the Sikri Kon, give a quarter to the original owner, but the original owner has the advantage. So Ratzu Bekarka Notlin, Ratzu B'mos Notlin. And they can either take 25% of the purchase price in cash, or they can take 25% of the purchase price in real estate. This seems to support Rav and go against Shmuel. Amosai, and when is this true? Bisman shein biyadan likach, afal yesh biyadan likach hein kod min l'chol adam. And at this stage, historically of the takana, the rabbi said that this is okay to do, provided that the original owner has first rights of refusal, that he is given the opportunity to buy it back from the Sikri Kon first. If for whatever reason he declines, then you can buy it and you pay 25% in cash or in land equivalent to the original owner. Rabbi Hoshiv based in Venimnu Shimshasa bifnei Sikri Kon 12 chodesh kol hakodim likach zacha aval nosein laba'olam revia bekarka or revia b'mos. And Rebbe's later enactment, which was like the third historical stage of this whole process, is that no, we don't give the original owner first rights of refusal, but rather, as long as the Sikri Kon has had it in his possession for 12 months or longer, any Jew can go ahead and buy it, provided that he gives a quarter either in cash of the purchase price or land equivalent of the per land he purchased to the original owner of 25% of the purchase price. And so the Gemara's question is, you see from here like Rav, that you're giving him 25% of the purchase price, which is 25, not 33 and a third. So it's a kasha on Shmuel. So the Gemara's answer is, Amar Rav Ashi, Kitanya hi la'acher shabo mos liyado. So Rav Ashi uses creative math to explain Shmuel. He says, what the Brisa really means is that it's a quarter once you've taken into account the true value of the field. If the true value of the field is 133 and a third, what is a quarter of that? That's 33 and a third. And that's what the Brisa means, that you have to pay 33 and a third to the original owner, not 25. Basically, each Amora has his way of looking at the Mishnah and the Brisa. Amar Rav, Ana Havoy b'minyana devei Rebbe, uminoi didi imanu bereisha. Now, when we go back historically to Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi's Beis Din, it's important to note that Rav is the first generation of Amoraim, but he's also a student of Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi. And so that means he's really on the cusp. And he says that when I was on Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi's Beis Din, the rule was that Rebbe would not give his opinion first, but he would ask me to give my opinion. And I was by no means the rabbi of the greatest stature on the Beis Din. And so that raises a flag, because the Gemara says, V'han antnan, dinei mamanos v'hataros v'hatumos maschilin min hagadol, v'dinei nefashos maschilin min hatzad. The Mishnah says that when it comes to financial law, you always start by polling the opinion of the leader, the rabbinic leader of the Beis Din, the greatest one on the Beis Din, and he states his opinion first. It's only when it comes to capital cases that we don't want to intimidate the lesser judges, and therefore we poll the lesser judges first. But financial law, which is what we're dealing with now, of how much you have to pay to the original owner, that's not capital. There's no dinei nefashos involved there. So why did Rav state his opinion first? Rebbe should have stated his opinion first. So Amar Rabba berei de Rabba v'tema Reb Hillel berei de Rebbe Valas shiny minyana devei Rebbe to kulu minyana min hatzad havu maschilin. He says Rebbe's Beis Din was an exception to that rule. In Rebbe's Beis Din, and Tosfos says it's really based on the fact that Rebbe wanted to practice humility more than his predecessors. And he basically said, I know that the normative protocol requires me to state my opinion first, but I would rather defer to my Talmidim. Out of humility, he did this. And that's the reason why Rebbe's Beis Din was different. V'omar Rabba berei de Rava v'tema Rebbe Hillel berei de Rebbe Valas. Another statement said by the same group of Chachamim is Miyamos Moshe ve'ad Rebbe lo matzinu Torah u'gedula b'makom echad. That, again, extolling the virtues of Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi, that from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu until the lifetime of Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi, there was no generation where you could find one singular person who was both the leader of the generation in Torah and the leader of the generation in political leadership as well. The one person in history was Moshe, and then you have to leap forward to the times of Rebbe, where you find that person being the same, possessing both roles of leadership. Sefrek the Gemara v'lo ha'ava Yehoshua. But the Gemara says, but what about Yehoshua, Moshe's disciple? He too was both the political and the Torah leader. The Gemara says no, because Hava Elazar. What we mean to say is that it's all in one person. If he shares it with another great scholar or another great political leader, it doesn't count. So since Elazar was the Kohen Gadol and he shared some of the Torah leadership responsibilities, so Yehoshua doesn't count. So frak the Gemara, V'ha'ava Elazar. Okay, but after Yehoshua died, Elazar took over, and he was the sole, both political and Torah authority. The Gemara says, no, have a Pinchas. But Pinchas was his partner, and therefore he also had a role of Torah leadership. V'ha'ava Pinchas. Okay, then after Elazar died, what about Pinchas, who took it over himself? The Gemara says, no, hava zukenim, because there were elders that were with him. I ha'ava Shaul. The Gemara says, what about Shaul HaMelech? By the time when we get to Shaul HaMelech, we find that he's both the political and the Torah leader. The Gemara says, hava Shmuel. Shmuel Hanavi was also a Torah leader, so you can't say that Shaul possessed it all himself. But the Gemara says, V'hanach nafshe. But what about after Shmuel died? After Shmuel died, wasn't Shaul left to his own recognizance as both the solitary Torah and political leader? The Gemara says no, because Kulu Shnei Kamrinan. That's true. However, what we're talking about is a person who, from the time he rose to his leadership position, consistently throughout his leadership role, he was the only voice of Torah leadership and political leadership. Since Shaul became the sole voice midstream, in the middle of his career, after he had already risen to political leadership, we're not counting him in the list. Rebbe is unique in that from the time that he rose to leadership, he was the solitary voice of both Torah authority and political authority. Oh, you mean as far as Moshe? The answer is that Aaron pales in comparison to Moshe. Moshe really sort of, since Aaron, as we'll see, Aaron completely abdicated any sense of autonomous authority to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe was the giver of the law, and he was the political leader as well. So, V'ha'ava David. The Gemara says, what about David HaMelech? So the Gemara says, no, Hava Ira HaYa'iri. That Ira HaYa'iri was a great scholar in David's time, and he paskin shailas. But V'hanach nafshe. But what about Ira Haya'iri passed away? The Gemara answers the same answer, Kulu Shnei Ba'ina. We're talking about someone from the beginning of his leadership to the end, he was the solitary voice. Ha Hava Shlomo, what about Shlomo HaMelech? So the Gemara says, Hava Shimi ben Gera. Well, because there was Shimi ben Gera, who was also a big posek in Shlomo's lifetime. V'hakatle, but Shlomo eventually killed Shimi. The Gemara answers the same answer, Kulu Shnei Kamrina. We're talking about someone who, for his entire career. Now, Ha'ava Chizkiah, what about Chizkiah HaMelech? So Hava Shevna. But Shevna was a great Torah scholar in Chizkiah's time, so he paskined halacha too. Ha'iktil, but he was killed by Sancheriv. The Gemara says, Kulu Shnei Kamrin, and again the same answer, but since he impinged on Chizkiah's reign partially, Chizkiah is not counted. V'ha'hava Ezra, what about Ezra HaSofer, rebuilds the temple? Gemara says, Hava Nechemya ben Chachlaya, but he also had Nechemya as his cohort, and therefore he doesn't count. Amar Ravacha Berei de Rava Afani Omer Miyamos Rebbe Va'ad Rav Ashi Lo Matzinu Torah Ugdula B'makom Echad. I'll add one, and I'll say that now that we're in the period of the Amoraim, from Rebbe until Rav Ashi, there was no one who had Torah and Gedula in the same person, and Rav Ashi is the only person since the times of Rebbe who could rival that. So, Frek the Gemara Vilo, V'ha'hava Huna Bar Nasan. The Gemara says, how could you say that Rav Ashi rivals Rebbe? Don't you have Rav Huna Bar Nasan, who's in the lifetime of Rav Ashi, and he also paskins halach, and he's also a great Torah leader? So the Gemara answers, Shiny Huna Bar Nasan, Demechav Havakayaf Leila Rav Ashi. The answer is because, and like this one I mentioned Rabbi Black a moment ago, that Rav Huna completely made himself subservient to the authority of Rav Ashi, and therefore he doesn't count as an independent Torah leader, because anytime there was an issue of halacha, he would defer to Rav Ashi. Let's go on to the next Mishnah. Cheresh romes v'nirmaz uben beseira umer kofetz v'nikvatz b'metaltalin. So it's an interesting halacha that even though there are certain people who do not have the ability to communicate for purposes of kinyanim and the like, nevertheless, if a person is mute and he can do sign language, that's sufficient for him to make kinyanim, and for him to both sell and to purchase different things from other people. So as long as he can communicate like that, then we allow him to buy and sell. And Ben Beseira is even more liberal, and he says that not only is sign language with your hands and other parts of your body sufficient, but when it comes to even more subtle movement just of the mouth, like he just mouths the words, that's sufficient for buying and selling, but only for chattel. In other words, when it comes to real estate and other things, then he agrees you have to use sign language. But when it comes to the purchase and selling of chattel, of metaltalin, he can even just mouth the words with his mouth. And hapuutos mekhan mekach umimkar and memkar b'metaltalin. And furthermore, says the Mishnah, children under the age of bar and bat mitzvah, their sales and purchases are valid, even though normally a katan does not have the ability to buy and sell al pi halacha. The rabbis instituted that their sales and purchases are valid, but only for chattel. And as we'll see, the reason why we're concerned about small children who are orphans. How are they going to survive if we don't allow them to go to market and make purchases and to make sales? So we have to be able to make this provision for them so that they'll have what to provide themselves with. The Gemara now says, Amar of Nachman machlokas b'metaltalin, avol begitten divrei hakol b'remiza. So Rav Nachman says the only time that Ben Beseira is makel and he allows just mouthing things with your mouth for a mute is only when it comes to metaltalin. But if a mute wants to divorce his wife, it'll only work with sign language, and he can't just use his mouth to signal the divorce. So the Gemara says pshita b'metaltalin tanan. Well, that's obvious. That's what the Mishnah says. It only works for metaltalin according to Ben Beseira. So the Gemara says no. Ma'udatema af b'metaltalin kamash malay. No, you might have thought that Ben Beseira is lenient both for metaltalin and for GITTEN. Why? Because GITTEN, you could have argued like this. How does a mute marry his wife? The rabbis permitted a mute to marry his wife by just mouthing the words of Harayat Mekudeshesli. So perhaps we could have argued that when it comes to divorcing her, he can divorce her the same way that he married her, with just mouthing the words. And the Kiddush is that no, that's what Rav Nachman wants to point out to us, is that Ben Beseira is only lenient with sales and purchases, but not with GITTEN. Ika da Amri Amr of Nachman kemachlokas b'metaltalin kach machlokas begittin. Some say just the opposite. That Rav Nachman said that just like Ben Beseira is lenient for a mute to mouth the words even without sign language in order to buy and sell metaltalin, he also allows that for a get because that's the way he married her, so he can divorce her that way as well. V'frek the Gemara v'hanan b'metaltalin tanan. But the Mishnah only limits it to metaltalin. So the Gemara says, Ema af b'metaltalin. So what the Mishnah means is that it's even for metaltalin. In other words, the Chiddush is not only does it work for Gittin, but it even works for metaltalin as well. That's the way you'd have to read the Mishnah according to the second reading of Rav Nachman. Next, Ha'pu'utos mechan mekach u'mimkaran memkar b'metaltalin, that children, we allow their sales and purchases to be valid. So va'ad kama, what's the youngest age where we permit this? So gmachvi Rav Yehuda l'Rav Yitzchak berei kibar shis kibar shev. He said around 6 or 7, and Rav Kahana Omer kibar shev kibar tmani, and Rav Kahana said 7 or 8, and b'masnisa tana kibar teisha kibar eser, and the Brisa says 9 or 10. And the Gemara points out velo plige, but really there's no machlokes kol chad v'chad lefi chorfei. Really, there is no fixed age. It all depends on the maturity and the precociousness of the child. Some children are mature and are savvy enough to buy and sell at the age of 7, and for some it takes them a little bit longer. They have to be 10 years old. So it all depends on the maturity of the child. The time of Maisa, why did the rabbis permit this, even though we know legally that a katan has no kinyan? Amar Rabbi Abba bar Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum kidei chayav. Because we need to let this child survive on the streets. If, let's say, he doesn't have parents that can take care of him and he has an estate, he has to be able to buy and sell in order to get food to be able to survive. That's the reason. Vayomer la'asher al hamaltacha hotzei levush lechol ovdei habal my maltacha. So there's a pasuk. This pasuk is in Menachem, and it talks about King Yoash, who basically says to the maltacha, provide clothing for the worshippers of the Baal. What the context is not important right now, but the question that the Gemara asks is, what is a maltacha? And the only reason that it's brought here is because it's the same Rabbi Abba bar Yaakov in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and he says, davar hanimlal v'nimtach. It is a fabric which is rolled in the fingers and then stretched. And that's a description of how linen is manufactured. Ki asa ravdimi amar Rabbi Yochanan, shiger lo bunyam ben nunyam, and some have the gears of bunyas ben nunyas, l'Rebbe, that this man, who was a wealthy man, sent a gift to Rebbe of sivni v'chumas, salsala umalmala, that he sent him these 4 different types of fabric. Hummus is not the food. Hummus is a type of fabric. So sivni v'chumas, ka'amgoza upalge de'amgoza. And the Gemara describes the virtue of this fabric. It is made out of linen, but it is such a fine linen that if you take a talis and you fold it up to its many, many folds, you can compact it to the size of 1.5 nuts. And the reason why that's virtuous is because, if you're traveling and you want to pack, you have limited amount in your suitcase, that's a great type of fabric to be able to use. And salsala umalmala kepiskita upalge de pistika. And salsala and malmala are also linen, just a little bit thicker. If you fold it up, you can fold it up to the size of 1.5 acorns. Now, my malmala, why is it called malmala? Davar animlal v'nimtach. Because it describes a type of fabric that the way you manufacture it is by rolling it in your fingers and stretching. Now, v'ta'usa not kama. So now the Gemara's questions, let's go back to these children. Let's say these children are exploited by an unscrupulous buyer or seller. At what point would we invalidate the sale when we say the kid was ripped off? So, Amar Rabbi Yaina, Amar Rab Zera, Adshtus kegadol. We wouldn't treat them any different from an adult. Just like if an adult is ripped off, if it's less than 1/6 of the purchase price, we let the sale go through because that's not significant enough of a swindle, right? Of an overcharge or an underpay. But if it's 1/6 or more, so then we can reverse the sale. Boy Abaya matnasomai. So now Abaya asked another question, which is, okay, the rabbis made a provision for purchases and sales. What about gifts? Would we say that the gift of a katan is a gift? There's no need to make the takana, but maybe it's all included. So Rav Yemer Omer Ein Matnaso Matana, Marba Ravashi Omer Matnaso Matana. So you have a machlokes. Rav Yemer said his gift is not a valid gift by law, and Mar, the son of Ravashi, said no, it is valid. However, the Gemara says that Avchua v'Shadrua l'Kamid Rav Mordechai. When the students heard the machlokes, they made an accident, they made a mistake, and they switched the positions. and they presented to Rav Mordechai that Mar, the son of Rav Ashi, held that a gift of a katan is not a legal gift. So Amar Lei Zilu Imru Labar Mar Lav Hachi Hava Uvda Ki Hava Koi Mar Chad Kari Ara V'Chad Kari Darga Ve'amarna Le Matna Somai V'Amarlon Matana Matana. And Rav Mordechai, thinking that Mar bar Rav Ashi had said that it's not a valid matana, said, I want you to correct him and tell him that his own father, I heard shir from his own father Rav Ashi, and I can tell you, I even remember the way he was standing. He had 1 foot on the ground and 1 foot on the stair, and we asked him the question, what is the din about a matana of a katan? And he said that it's a valid matana, and it doesn't matter echas matna shchiv meirav, echas matnas bari, echas matana meruba, echas matana muetes. It doesn't matter whether the kid is on his deathbed, whether he's perfectly healthy, whether it's a small gift or a large gift. If it's a pa'utos, if the kid is savvy, we can talk to him and recognize he knows what he's doing, then his matana halachically is a valid matana. Let us go weiter. The Mishnah says, Elu dvarim amru mipnei darkei shalom. The following things the rabbis instituted on an institutional basis because we want to keep the peace. So, and you'll see in just a minute what's an example of keeping the peace. Kohen Kori Rishon v'achar of Levi v'achar of Yisrael mipnei darkei shalom. That when we call up for an aliyah, for a public kriyas HaTorah, the Kohen always gets the first aliyah, the Levi always gets the second aliyah, and a Yisrael always gets the third aliyah. And that's because of darkei shalom. We want to keep the peace, because otherwise we're going to have people break out into fistfights. Hey, how come I didn't get the first aliyah? So we say, sorry, Rabbi, the Kohen always gets the first. You know that story about the guy, the Gabbai asked him, are you a Kohen, Levi, or Yisrael? He says, I'm none of the above. The Gabbai says, I don't know, what does that mean? He says, so what are you? He says, I'm a Shishi. Anyway, so the Gemara, so let us continue. So here's another thing that's mipnei darkei shalom. Ma'arvin bebayis yasham mipnei darkei shalom. That if, let's say, you have a courtyard community, and they always make an eruv chatzeros, they always make an eruv among themselves. So you need where does the box of matzah go? It always stays in the same house that it's always been done, so that there's no machlokes. And bor shehu karov la'ama mismale rishon mipnei darkei shalom. Another institutional policy in Jewish society is that if you have a tributary that runs off of a river, and it's there to irrigate the various fields that are part of that are adjacent to this tributary. So the rule is that every farmer would dig a trench, and as the tributary would fill with water, each farmer would remove the plank from the trench and let the water flow into the trench that would be used for irrigation. So the question is, which farmer gets to get his trench filled first? And the answer is they made a policy because of darkei shalom, so there shouldn't be machlokes. The farmers that are closest to the river are the ones who get to open their trenches and fill it up first. And once theirs are filled, they put the plank and close their trench so that the water now flows further downstream. And then it goes to the next farmer, and then to the next farmer, and so forth. And they did that because of darkei shalom. Mitzudos chaya va'ofos v'dagim yeshba mishum gazel mipnei darkei shalom. The next thing that the Mishnah says is that if you guys are a trapper out in the wild, and you walk along and you find that an animal is trapped in this guy's trap, technically that animal is hefker, because his trap was not kind of the animal, so legally you'd be able to take it. But the rabbis made a rule and says, no, if it's trapped in this guy's trap, you have to let him have it. That's because of darkei shalom. And Rabbi Yossi Omer Gezel Gomer, Rabbi Yossi says it's not because of darkei shalom, but that's actually a rule of Gezel, that you're called the Gazlan if you do that. And the Gemara will explain that even Rabbi Yossi agrees that it's not Gezel Midioraisa, but it's more than just darkei shalom. We actually call it Mamish Gezel. Now, Metzias Chayre Shaita V'Katan Yeshba Mishum Gezel Mipnei Darkei Shalom. Another thing that the Mishnah says is that if you find if a person who's not of sound mind, like an insane person or a minor, picks up an object that they find on the street, technically you can just grab it from them because they don't have das to be kona. However, the rabbis made a rule. This is going to create terrible strife if you take candy from a baby or whatever, So therefore, they said no, you have to let them keep it, and otherwise it's called gezel if you take it because of darkei shalom. And here too, Rabbi Yossi Omer gezel gomer. He says no, it's complete theft. It's not just a darkei shalom kind of theft. And the Gemara will explain what the difference between the two is. Ani hamenakef berosh hazayis mashetachtav gezel mipnei darkei shalom. And Rabbi Yossi also here too says Omer gezel gomer. if you have a poor man, just as an illustration, does lav dafka, a poor man, but a guy's on top of an olive tree and he's shaking off the olives off the tree. The olives that fall to the ground, technically he wasn't kona them, but because he did the labor to get the olives, no one else is allowed to take them, and that's because of Darkei Sholem. And Rabbi Yossi says if you take them, you're mamash a gazlan. And finally, ein memachin. We do not protest if a farmer leaves his gleanings, which are meant for Jewish poor people. We don't protest and disallow non-Jewish poor people from taking those gleanings. Now, by the way, this is codified as halacha in Shulchan Aruch and in the Rambam, that a portion of your tzedakah money should go to non-Jews because of Darkei Sholem, because of keeping the peace. I don't know why Jews seem to have forgotten this halacha. When you're in the airport and the lady from the Salvation Army asks for you as for a donation, and she sees your yarmulke, mipnei Darkei Sholem, you're supposed to give her something, right? You're supposed to.
But she's Salvation Army is associated with the Christian.
Narishkeit,
you know?
Narishkeit. I tell you, I hereby tell you that is false.
What was it?
If they're helping poor people, what difference does it make if she's from a church or not? If they're giving clothes away to the poor, that should not be the reason that you don't give them. Now, there may be some who disagree with me. I'm perfectly prepared to disagree with others. But I tell you, and I'm telling you this is my personal psak halacha, that if you see a poor person, I don't care whether they've got a cross on or not. If they're collecting for indigent, homeless people, you have to give them mipnei Darkei Sholem.
If you're visibly a Jew. Doesn't matter.
Right, if you're visibly a Jew, mipnei Darkei Sholem, you're supposed to keep the peace with Gentiles in your society. Especially if it's part of it, if let's say a charity drive in Vaughan, a charity drive in Thornhill, just because you have to participate. Mipnei Darkei Sholem.
It says Imamachin, isn't that like you're...
Look in the Rambam, Shloimi, look in the Rambam.
It says you're obligated to do it? Or
you'll see, the Rambam extrapolates.
The
Rambam extrapolates from this halacha that you have to. A certain percentage of your most... Take a look, just look in the Rambam, you'll see what he says. The Gemara now says, Minahani Mili. From where do we know this? From where do we know that a Kohen gets the first Aliyah, Levi gets second, and Yisrael gets third? Amar of Masna do Amar Kra. Because the pasuk says, "Vayichtov Moshe es haTorah hazos vayitna laKohanim b'nei Levi," because the Torah says that Moshe wrote this Torah, and he gives it to the Kohanim, the children of Levi. So the Gemara says, "Atu ana lo yadana to Kohanim b'nei Levi ninu." Why do you have to make a point to tell me at the end of the Torah that the Kohanim are the children of Levi? Obviously, that's true. Why do I need the Torah to tell me that? So Ela Kohen Bereisha v'hada Levi. It's an asmachta to teach me that Kohen and then B'nai Levi, then after him comes Levi. That's the basis for this structure. It's really rabbinic, but we're basing it on this pasuk. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Amar Mehacha v'nigashu HaKohanim B'nai Levi. Ata anan lo yadinan to Kohanim B'nai Levi. Ninu, he says a similar pasuk. The Kohanim B'nai Levi will approach. So don't we know that the Kohanim are B'nai Levi? So Ela Kohen Bereisha v'hadar Levi. This too teaches me that Kohen first and then a Levi. Rav Ashi Amar Mehacha. Rav Ashi says you learn it from here. B'nei Amram, Aaron, Moshe. This is a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim that the sons of Amram were Aaron and Moshe. Vayibodel Aaron lahakdisho kodesh kadoshim. And Aaron was separated to sanctify him as holy of holies. So therefore, it seems like we're giving prominence to Aaron even before Moshe. Rabbi Chia bar Abba Omer Mehacha v'kidashtu l'chol davar shebikdusha. Now, the way that the poskim understand Rabbi Chia bar Abba is that he's switching gears a little bit. He's telling us that not only is this just a rabbinic law, but it's a biblical law. The Torah says you have to sanctify the Kohen. Any matter that involves sanctity within the Jewish community publicly requires you to give the honor to the Kohen first. Tana Devi Rabbi Yishmael v'kidash l'chol davar shebikdusha. He says the same thing in the Brisa. Liftoach rishon ulevarech rishon v'litol mana yafer rishon. This teaches me that he's the first one to open any aspect of Kavod HaTorah, whether he's giving the drasha first, the first Devar Torah, whether he's going to get the first Aliyah, to lead the benching first. And also, if you're having a meal with him and you're dividing a meal, you have to give the Kohen the opportunity to take his portion first. Amar le Abayla Rav Yosef mipnei Darkei Sholem deoraisihi. So Abaye says to Rabbi Yosef, he says, based on this Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, why are you telling me that the Kohen gets the first Aliyah because of Darkei Shalom? You should tell me that he gets the first Aliyah because of the mitzvah V'kidashta, which is a biblical law. So Amar Lei de Oraisa umipnei Darkei Shalom. So Rabbi Yosef gives him a classic answer. He says, you're right, it's a biblical law, but the reason why the Torah told us this is because of keeping the peace. In other words, the Torah's objective in giving us this law was Darkei Shalom. So it's not just an asmachta, exactly. So the Gemara says, Kol HaTorah kulanami mibnei Darkei Shalom hi. Dirsiv derachei darcheina v'chol nesivo se'ah shalom. So Abaye challenges it. He says, Rebbe, come on. Every mitzvah in the Torah is because of Darkei Shalom. When you get down to the core of it, every mitzvah in the Torah has an aspect of peacekeeping in it, because as the Mishlei says, derachei darcheina v'chol nesivo se'ah shalom. All the pathways of Torah lead to peace. So you can't tell me that that's what the Mishnah means when it says Mipnei Darkei Shalom, because that's redundant. So Ela Amar Abaye L'chidemar. So really Abaye says it's like my Rebbe taught from the Brisa. My Rebbe Rabbi taught from the following Brisa: the Tanya Shnai Mamtinim Zela Zebikara Shlosha Ein Mamtinim. There's a Brisa that says as follows: if two people are sharing a meal, then each one has to wait. Etiquette requires each one to wait for the other before beginning to partake. But if there are three people who sit down and one guy says, "Excuse me for a minute, Rabbi Isai," the other two are not obligated to wait for him. Etiquette does not require that. And Habotseya who posha yado techila. And furthermore, the balabas who's making hamotzi, he also has rights of taking from the serving dish of the other dishes first. However, v'imba lachla kabel l'rabba ulamisha gadol mimeno harishus biyado. So the Brisa says, however, even though you're the balabas and you're the host, you do have a right to ask someone who's your Rebbe, who's dining with you, or someone else that you want to show honor to. You can ask them to make hamotzi. You can ask them to take first from the plate. So va'amar mar Allah, and so this is what my Rebbe said, Rabba. Lo shanu ela b'seuda, aval b'veis hakneses lo da'asi lein suye. And this is the Darkei Shalom. Really, b'dioraisa, a Kohen goes first. When it comes to other areas of Jewish life, a Kohen has the right to be moichel and to ask someone else that he wants to honor to do it instead. He can say, listen, I'd like to ask you to lead the benching. I don't need to lead the benching. But when it comes to public Torah reading, a Kohen does not have a right to say, no, Reb Yid, I'd rather give the aliyah to you. Why? Because that's going to lead to fighting. Because why'd you give it to him and not to me? What's wrong? Right? So really, it's the oraisa that the Kohen should get the first aliyah. And the rabbi said that the Kohen has no right to be moichel in order to keep the peace. That's why even in halacha today, almost never do we allow a Kohen to be moichel and to give the aliyah to somebody else. The Gemara will give us one exception.
I don't know how they ask him to leave, and he's...
Okay, so that's a different issue. One it deserves a shear. Amar of Masna hada amart beveis hakneses lo amran elo b'shabbasos v'yomim tovim d'shchichi rabim aval b'sheni uv'chamishi lo. So Rav Masna says that which you say, that in a beis hakneses you can't, a Kohen can't be moichel, that's only on Shabbos and Yom Tov, where there's so many people, and that's going to lead to strife. But on a Monday and Thursday, where you have, a smaller group, it's okay for the Kohen to be moichel. So the Gemara now says, Eini, is this really so that on Shabbos and Yom Tov the Kohen can't be moichel? V'ha Rav Huna kari b'kohani b'Shabbosos v'Yom Tov. Rav Huna used to get the Kohen aliyah, and he was not a Kohen, so how could he do that? So the Gemara answers, Shiny Rav Huna da'afilu Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi kohani chashivi de'eretz Yisrael meikav havu kaifilei. The difference is that Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi were Kohanim. They were Gedolei Hador, but they deferred to Rav Huna, who was considered to be the Gadol Hador. So when you have a person who's the singular individual in his generation, then he can get the Kohen Aliyah as long as the other Kohanim are Moichel. So that really leads to a whole discussion about when Kohanim can be Moichel, when they cannot be Moichel. I gave a 2-part shir on this in Kosher Tube. Amar Abaye Naktina and Ein Sham Kohen Nispar de Chavila. Abaye says our psak is that if there's no Kohen, then the protocol is broken, and therefore you can give the aliyah to anyone that you like. And by the way, that boils down to you can either give it to a Yisrael or to a Levi. There's no requirement to give it to a Levi. The Amar Abaye Naktinan Ein Sham Levi Kore Kohen. And furthermore, says Abaye, if there's no Levi in the shul, you call up a Kohen first, and then you give the second Aliyah to a Kohen as well. So the Gemara says, Eini, is this really so? V'hama Rabbi Yochanan Kohen acher Kohen lo yikra mishum pegamo shel rishon. But we said that a Kohen cannot be called up after another Kohen because it might cast aspersions on the first Kohen. People will think he's not really a Kohen. That's why you have to call up a second Kohen. So the Gemara answers, you're right. And also, Levi acher Levi lo yikra mishum pegam shenehem. And one Levi should not read after another Levi because people may cast aspersions upon either Levi. Either the first Levi was Pagam or the second Levi was Pagam. So the Gemara says, you're right. Ki kamrinan ba'oso Kohen. So the Gemara says, you're right. When we say that a Kohen should be called up after a Kohen, it means the same Kohen. The same Kohen who got the Kohen Aliyah should also get the Levi Aliyah. That's what we mean. So, Ma'ishna Levi achar Levi, di'ika pagam shenehem, damri chad minayu lav Levihu. Kohen achar kohen nami amri chad minay alav kohenu. So the Gemara's question is, why did the language of the Brisa change? We said that one Kohen should not read after another Kohen because it'll cast aspersions on the first Kohen. Why only on the first Kohen? We said one Levi should not read after another Levi because it'll cast aspersions on either of them. Why don't we say the same either of them by the Kohen? Why are we only concerned about the first Kohen? So the Gemara answers, Kagon, de muchzak lan biavua, da hai sheni de Kohenhu. The answer is because we're talking about a case where the second Kohen who got the Aliyah, we know his father is a Kohen. So therefore, the only concern is about the first Kohen. The Gemara says, what kind of answer is that? Well, then say the same thing by the Levi. Well, you should only be worried about the first Levi because we know that the second Levi's father is a Levi. So Ella Amri Mamzeres Onasina Nasivu Pasle Lazari Hachanami Amri Gerusha Chalutza Nasiv Achle Lazari. So rather, what are you going to say about the Levi? Why are you worried that not only about the first Levi but about the second Levi? Because people will say, even though we know that the second Levi's father is a Levi, maybe his father married a Mamzeres, and therefore this kid is not a kosher Levi anymore. And people will say the same thing about the Kohen. Even though we know that the second Kohen's father is a Kohen, maybe his father married a Grusha, a divorcee, and so this kid is not a legitimate Kohen. So sof Levi mikahavi. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute. If you're calling up the first Kohen, and then you're calling up a second Kohen, the only concern is going to be for the first Kohen is not a legitimate Kohen. Because if you're calling up a second Kohen and he's not a kosher Kohen, what would he be? If he's not a kosher Kohen, he's not going to be a Levi, he'll be a Yisrael. So we know for sure if you're calling up a second Kohen, he's either totally puzzle or he's a total Kohen. He's not a Levi. So therefore our concern is not about the second Kohen. We assume he's a kosher Kohen. Our concern is only going to be that this indicates that the first Kohen was not a Kohen, and that's why that's a concern. But a Levi after a Levi, we have to be concerned about either one. Either the first one's not a Levi, and that's why they called up this guy as a Levi, or the second Levi is not a Levi, and that's why they called up him up as a Yisrael. So Ulaman. The Gemara's now question is, who are we concerned about who's going to see this and is going to think that either one of them is a puzzle? And we'll have to continue this Gemara in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow.